Mountain High.
Rocky Mountain High, yeah. All right, let's do this. Hi, Jim, everyone. This is Dr. Josh, and this is the moment you've all been waiting for. I know that my community wanted me to arm wrestle the great Charles Hoskinson, so this is the moment that you get. All right, let me turn around my hat like in the movie, remember, with Stallone? But anyways, so I'll take off the glasses. We have here one of the OGs of crypto, as you know, Charles Hoskinson. How was France so far?
I love France. It's always a lot of fun. Incredibly good food, interesting people, and it's just a beautiful city, Paris. It's one of the most beautiful cities in the world.
It is. And you know, Paris Blockchain Week started from Crypto Mondays.
Really?
Yeah. Michael Lamar was our local coordinator, 2018, 2020. And he built the community up, and now it's one of the biggest events in the world.
10,000 people, they tell me.
Yeah, 10,000 people, at least on paper, you know.
Yeah, paper people.
That's how it's going. And so how does it feel to be behind or be part of the first fully decentralized blockchain community, maybe besides Bitcoin?
Yeah. Well, I mean, Bitcoin is really decentralized as well. The problem is they can't coordinate. So it's decentralized without upgradability. I think you have to think about on-chain governance from the perspective of it gives you something for what you pay for it. So it's very expensive to build an on-chain government. You have to write a constitution. You have to elect people. You have to actually do the governance stuff. But then once you have it, you can coordinate on three major functions. You can coordinate on the roadmap, so how the product evolves and develops over time. You can coordinate on the treasury, so how do you spend money to actually make that happen in a way that's decentralized? And then you also can coordinate on the upgrades of the system, so how to hard fork in the system. And that's a requirement if you have a complex system. If you're a simple system like Bitcoin, where you say we're going to be like a decentralized store of value and maybe a payment system, and the only thing you do is move Bitcoin around, you don't really need to upgrade that very much once you've created a network effect. But if you're a smart contract layer where you want to be better, faster, and cheaper, and you want to add like the latest and greatest zero knowledge proofs, and you want to have like a lot of new complex things inside your ecosystem, like all technology, you have to upgrade the system. You got to go from Windows 95 to Windows 98 to Windows XP, and every step of the way you learn something, and you have to do that in a decentralized way. So it's awesome, but it took 2 years to do it. It was so much work. We had to write a constitution. 18,000 people were involved, 50 countries. And we traveled and had workshop after workshop, and then they had to get all the shit ratified on chain, had to elect a government, and then no matter what you do, someone's angry. So the minute they're angry, they go to Twitter, right, and they go and complain about it. So you deal with all that, and they bark very loud. But all things considered, we're now in a state where you have the right to try, and any government has three parameters that you look at. You look at integrity, efficacy, and efficiency. So integrity is once you write the rules down, how good of a job do you do to honor those rules? So when you're in a government using like freedom of speech and freedom of religion, if you go and burn down churches because you don't like what they're saying, then you're kind of like really violating both of those, right? That's not an integrity building system. In the case of efficiency, that's how quickly you make a decision. So you say we need to get a budget done. Does it take a week or 6 months or 2 years? So that's how efficient the system is. And efficacy is, are you making good decisions or bad decisions? You know, like California says, hey, we want to build all this high-speed rail. And China says the same thing at the same time. China has 16,000 miles of high-speed rail. It's constructed. California is 0. So not a very effective system, right? That you have an intent, you didn't do that thing. So usually you have like a governance trilemma where you typically only get 2 of the 3, sometimes 1 of the 3. So you can have a very efficient and effective system, but sometimes it doesn't preserve integrity. China's an example of that. If they have to go shoot a bunch of people to build that train, they'll go and do that. Other systems like Switzerland, it's very integrity preserving and it's very effective. So when they make a decision, they tend to make good decisions and they preserve the human rights of the thing, but it's horrifically inefficient. Because it's a confederacy and it takes a long time to do things. Like in Zurich, if you want to build a building, they have a building with a beautiful wooden model of the entire city. And you have to go through years of meetings and make the case why your building is not going to mess up Zurich. And it could take you 20 years to build a skyscraper or some shit like that. Yeah. But once they build it, it's a beautiful building and it looks really nice and everybody's happy. So it's efficient, it's effective, and it's integrity preserving, but it's inefficient. So good governance systems try to aspire to have all three. So in the context of a cryptocurrency, you don't violate the things that everybody believes in, like a deflationary monetary policy or these types of things. But at the same time, you can quickly make decisions like a hard fork or a roadmap or a budget, and you tend to be making good decisions. Like you don't break the network, or you don't have the wrong roadmap and give all the money to some jack off or something like that. So that's what we're experimenting.
Right. So I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, of course, but we're crypto money, so we keep this short. And shout out to Zurich. He mentioned Zurich. Shout out to our crypto monies team in Zurich and everywhere around the world.
They'll know about the wooden building.
They will know.
Yeah.
But did you know actually that the train system in Switzerland is put on the blockchain, and they actually completed that project early?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay. Is there anything you don't know?
But it probably took them 30 years to decide to do that.
Yeah. Well, this is the interestingness. I mean, I didn't have this question planned, but why not? This is an interesting contrast I've noticed with Europe and the U.S. as far as getting things done.
Yeah.
I mean, things can happen a lot quicker, especially now when with the change in administration and stuff. But where do you see that the speed of things happening now with Cardano? Because I know you've taken a long approach, and I used to be a professor myself, so I was an academic. I respect the academic approach. It's taking obviously a long time to go through all of this. It's smart. As Ethereum, obviously, and Solana is more of the move fast and break things mentality versus the lower approach. Where is it going now? Because it seems to be speeding up quite quickly with Cardano.
Yeah, when you build a really strong foundation, it takes a very long time to construct that foundation. And once you have that foundation constructed, then you can actually build beautiful structures on top of it. If you just start with the beautiful structure and you have a terrible foundation, you sink into the swamp and everybody dies. So Ethereum is a great example of being a victim of its own success. They built too quickly. They didn't really have a strategy for scalability. So then they invited in the mercenaries, the layer twos, just like Rome invited in the mercenaries to defend itself. And then eventually the mercenaries turn on you. The Visigoths sack Rome. So all these layer twos are kind of eating the transaction volume, eating the user base, and they're trying to sort their way out. Solana, they kind of said, okay, our growth model will be meme coin mania. And they really benefited from that. But now that that's dying down, it's not intrinsically clear where their growth model is going to be. And plus, they have a ton of protocol issues they have to resolve. So for Cardano, there's really those three pillars of Ouroboros with extended UTXO with on-chain governance. So Ouroboros, the way we construct it, is like a telescoping protocol. So as you make an innovation, you can always fall back to the prior innovation if there's a problem. So we have Prouse and all these other things, and no matter what, we always have that. So the protocol that ran Cardano for the last 7 years, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, is always there. It'll never change. But then you could add extensions to improve the finality and throughput of the system. So you can go really fast, but if some catastrophic event happens, you fall back to what we've already tried and tested for the last 7 years. That's a very different protocol architecture than what you see with Narwhal and Tusk with Sui, or you see with what Aptos is doing with Jolteon, or what Solana is doing, or what Ethereum is doing. The other thing is baked in, you still preserve and protect that 50% Byzantine resistance and the liquid non-custodial staking, so you don't have to have this bond and slashing and these other things that these other protocols have. You just have this beautiful fluid system where you never lose your money for participating in consensus. Then with extended UTXO, really the key driver there was saying, wait a minute here, the majority of stuff that's going to happen in blockchain is paradoxically going to happen somewhere else, not on your blockchain. Either it's going to happen in legacy infrastructure, in a dApp, in a layer 2, in a state channel, in a payment channel. And really what blockchains are going to inevitably do is they're going to be really good at being the settlement layer for the proofs and the audits of these types of things. And it just makes sense. If I'm X and I create a tipping function, and if I really like a tweet, I click a button to tip a penny. Well, there's 500 million users. That could be 1 billion transactions a month. Do I really want to put 1 billion transactions on the blockchain when they're all a penny or less? That doesn't make any sense. But what I'd like to do is take a batch of all those things over time, and one thing represents that month's billion transactions. That's one transaction for 1 billion. Well, that's what UTXO does so well. You have inputs and outputs, and those outputs can be proofs. And they could be a representation of a whole huge story somewhere else. And what's nice is you get isomorphism with that. So whatever the heck that is, you get a guarantee that the security properties are the same on both sides of it when you layer it with zero-knowledge cryptography. You can't do this with an account-style system. That's like having a global variable or something like that. Everybody gets to mess with it, and you're constantly trying to figure out how do I lock that resource and unopen it. And it's really hard to shard. It's really hard to get to work with off-chain, and you can't preserve those security guarantees. Right. You look at different systems. So UTXO was a really good idea. That's why Satoshi did it in 2009. The problem is it wasn't programmable. So we had to take UTXO and create extended UTXO to add smart contract support to it. And it took about 6 years to figure out how to do that. So now that we have it, it's all just a game of developer accessibility, interoperability, and you're already doing that. You start with Haskell, now you can write in Rust and TypeScript, and we're starting to figure out how to get it so that you can write Bitcoin smart contracts with it. And we're adding all this stuff in so it's easy for EVM to play in and all these other things. And then the governance, as we've already discussed, it's like the single most important thing, because any innovation that comes in the broader cryptocurrency space, good governance gives you the ability within 18 to 36 months to study it and dissect it and absorb it. Whereas these other guys, it's a lot harder, because what if there's a cabal of people that benefit from that thing not being in your system? They'll prevent it from getting inside the system, even though it's not to the benefit of every single user.
Yeah, I just got a couple more questions, and one is technical, and one is about leadership. A lot of people, you talk about security layers and how that's developed over time and needed to develop in different ways. And then you also mentioned Satoshi as his vision in that regard. A lot of people are talking about AI. This is the big thing, decentralized AI Agent Alliance. If you're going to Crypto Mondays, is what we're working with. But you've been talking about quantum and getting ready for quantum actuators and preparing for this big change that will be happening in the next few years. Why are you talking about that, and what should we prepare for, especially in relation to security, C phrases, these kind of things?
So quantum computers are probably the most misunderstood and most interesting things in modern computing. So a lot of people think quantum computers are these magical MacGuffins that make just everything exponentially faster, and they do something fundamentally different. So the way I like to explain how quantum computing works is, let's say this really hot girl wants to give you her number, and so she plays a fucked up game with you, and she writes her number in a library randomly in a book.
Really hot girl would never do that.
I know. Let's say she does this, right? And so the problem is, then you walk into this library, and there's like millions of freaking books inside the library, and like, where did she write the number? And so what you would do if you were a classical computer is that you would go and randomly take a book off the shelf, one after another, open the book in, look through all the pages, see if you can find the number. And so how you would speed that up in a classical sense is you get more people to help search and pull books out. So that's parallelism. And you search through the books faster. That's increasing the clock rate. But there's kind of a fundamental limitation there, especially if there's a lot of bugs. What a quantum computer does is it has three properties. It has a concept of superposition, it has the concept of interference, and a concept of entanglement. So with superposition, what it'll do is kind of open every book at the same time. And then with entanglement, superposition, it'll kind of figure out, roughly speaking, where that book that she wrote the number is, and then put all the books back on the shelf, but the one that has the number kind of pull it out a little bit. So then as a classical computer, you come and you notice that one of the books is a little pulled out, so you know that's the book you go and grab. So it doesn't speed up how fast you do the calculation, rather it gives you some intuition of where to look. And the reason why this defeats cryptography is that most of cryptography is that needle in a haystack thing.
Right.
When you have the public key, it's all the books.
Yeah.
But when you have the private key, you know that it's that particular book, right?
Yeah.
So whether it be integer factorization or discrete logarithm problem or these types of things. So when a quantum computer comes, it will defeat classical crypto, because it'll give you that, through Grover's algorithm and Shor's algorithm, a sense of basically where to look for these things. Now, we have a class of algorithms called post-quantum crypto algorithms that give us the ability to defeat that.
Post-quantum crypto algorithms.
And the biggest issue with post-quantum crypto was not the math, it was the standardization. Because here's the issue. Crypto lives and dies by standards bodies. A standards body will come in like NIST, and they'll say, this is the crypto suite, and everybody starts adopting it. Now, if you deviate from that suite, the problem is that the hardware manufacturers will go and build specialized things for that suite, so your stuff is 100 times slower. So when you look at Intel chips and AMD chips and ARM chips and NVIDIA chips and all these things that are in your GPUs and CPUs in your computer or your cell phone, they have specialized cores for symmetric ciphers like AES and for SHA-256 and for elliptic curve crypto, but they wouldn't have specialized cores for some exotic crypto scheme because they just don't do that. So you have to wait for the standards to form, which they have, FIPS 203, 204, 205, and CWB 206. And now that they have, the hardware manufacturers are going to start making specialized cores in the chips just for that. Once they do, we in the crypto industry, all we got to do is just adopt those.
Okay, and so it's about adopting new standards, but not necessarily creating new standards.
Exactly.
Because these are already existing, or like Microsoft and these people are already working on these.
Yeah, because even if you have a better one, you're not going to be better plus trusted hardware.
Okay.
The hardware will be 10 times faster, 100 times faster, right?
So my Bitcoin is safe.
Yeah, no.
No. My Cardano is safe.
No.
My 88.
Nobody's safe right now. Nobody's adopted these algorithms. And the reason they haven't is because they're typically about 10 times slower. And so nobody wants to pay the price.
Right.
And nobody's going to walk in and say, it does the same security that you have now, and it's going to protect you against this magic MacGuffin that'll exist maybe 10 or 20 years in the future, but now you're 10 times slower and also less functional than the other stuff. Nobody wants to do that.
So you're working on this.
Yeah, so this is the hard problem, is how do you make post-quantum crypto more efficient? And also, when is that inflection point where we pay the price of post-quantum crypto? So what we're probably going to do is pay that price for cross-chain communication, because you have to throw a lot of things at the same time. It's like if you're in Bitcoin and you receive a transaction from Cardano, or if you're Cardano, you receive a transaction from Bitcoin or vice versa. Well, I need to know that those Bitcoin exist and they haven't been double spent. Pretty simple. So naively, how I would do that is I'd have a full node on both sides. And that's not very scalable, right? It's like this huge amount of resources. What I'd like is when you send the transaction with a proof, and I, just by looking at that proof, can know they're not double spent, they exist. Well, I can start using those proofs in a post-quantum way because it's a new artifact inside the system. That's the first step, and then you can do checkpoints that way, and then eventually all your history inside the system starts getting into these post-quantum structures, and then the last mile is adopting a post-quantum signature scheme, like a hash-based signature scheme or lattice.
Right, so the quantum can't change history.
Exactly right.
Somehow. I got it. All right.
Yeah, because I can't break the crypto and rewrite the whole chain.
Okay. Well, you see, everybody, crypto is really easy to understand, and quantum theory too. Well, we have a person to explain it very easily. I have one more question, but I think you'd actually like my second question. Is I'm going to get off the technical stuff and move to the leadership side, because we talked about Satoshi a couple times here. Satoshi Nakamoto. And by the way, if I want to get a girl's number in a library and it's somewhere, I would just go up to her and say, hey, you want to go meet Satoshi Nakamoto? And I said, he's sitting right here. And she'll say, who's that? And I'll say, oh, how about Charles Hoskinson? He's got 1 million followers on Twitter. And she'll say, oh, yeah, okay. And Jen doesn't even know who you are. But regarding Satoshi Nakamoto, how is Satoshi Nakamoto, I'm getting ready to write a chapter for the International Leadership Association on the ghost leadership of Satoshi Nakamoto. And you're my first survey participant here. It's a one-question survey. How has the leadership, the ghost leadership, meaning Satoshi being a ghost, how has Satoshi, influenced you as a leader? And in that sense, because you're a real well-recognized leader in the industry.
Depends on who you ask, right?
Like you said, there's always those naysayers.
Yeah. So the thing about Satoshi is the magic of Satoshi is that he knew when to be in the room and when not to be in the room. So Satoshi knew exactly how to set up a system, and when it started getting momentum, to just simply know to leave that system and never come back. And that's really hard for a leader, because a leader, you spend years of your life on something, you put a huge economic investment, you're emotionally very connected to that venture, and you don't want to see it go sideways. And so you'd like to step in. And it's initially very easy because you say, oh, everything's great, but then a crisis happens. And then you feel this implicit desire to come in on a white horse and save the whole ecosystem. And Satoshi resisted the urge to do that. And for that, Bitcoin is Bitcoin today. Had Satoshi come in after Mt. Gox or something else and said, I'm here to save everybody, Bitcoin would have never really gotten off that dependency of that. And a great example in the business world, a real life example, is Bill Gates and Microsoft. And so Bill Gates kind of shadow left Microsoft, but not really for a while. It was catastrophic to Microsoft. So Gates at the turn of the 20th to 21st century, kind of lost his passion because of the antitrust case. He got sued for basically winning. He was at $600 billion valuation. It was the largest tech company in history. They had 90% of the market. He just basically won. He killed everybody. He's like Genghis Khan in Central Asia. Just everybody is under his empire. And then they get sued, and they're like, we're going to break your company up. And he says, it's just not fun anymore. Why be the CEO? If you get too successful, you get broken up. So he said, you know what, I'm going to take a step back and go into charity. So he decided to stay as the chief software guy or strategy guy or whatever the fuck he called himself. But the problem was that Ballmer was never his own man as the CEO. He always had Gates in the shadow. And anytime something come up, Gates would be like, do this, buy Skype, do this thing, do this thing. And so he kind of, from the shadows, micromanaged a lot of things in Microsoft. And the issue was they missed all the major stuff for 10 years. They missed the iPhone, they missed Google, they missed Facebook, and they had every ability to win this stuff. They allowed Internet Explorer to go from a 90% market share to de minimis. The Windows got very stagnant. Windows Vista was an unmitigated disaster, as was Windows 8. All these things just came up. When Gates finally left, Satya Nadella comes in, and Microsoft goes from a $300 billion company to a $3 trillion company.
Right.
Because it was a fresh perspective. There was new things, and it didn't diminish what Gates had done and get constructed. Excellence. But what it did do is it allowed the new leaders to emerge that were the leaders for those times. And so it's really hard to take a step back. But I think that's the single most valuable thing that Satoshi trained people is that you have to know when to leave, and you have to know how to leave, and you have to know how to leave enough governance structure behind so that when you leave, you're not leaving chaos, but rather you have something that's sustainable and functional. So when you look at Cardano, we've been deeply inspired there with Voltaire, and what we've tried to leave behind is not just an ability for the chain to run itself, but also a governance structure for the chain to adapt to changes in the world. We can't predict what's going to happen between the United States and China, or the end of this trade war, or what new technology is coming, or how AI is going to change things, or things like that. But what we can predict is the tools that we have, there's enough of them that when these things happen, the people in Cardano themselves in a bottom-up way can make a decision on how to change.
And so you felt that based on that inspiration from Nakamoto, that it was the time to fully decentralize. That took a 2-year or multiple year process, and then you stepped back, and that's probably difficult, isn't it?
It is.
In some way, but you trust the community.
Yeah, I do. And in many cases, they're just going to do it better than we can. Yeah. A great example would be Aiken. So we had this vision of the ideal programming language for Cardano. It was Plutus, and we had this idea of how everything was supposed to work and happen, and it didn't work out the way we hoped, and we got a lot of friction in the DevX. And so some people from the community just got together and said, well, screw it, we're going to create our own programming language. So they created Aiken. It was based on Rust, and it's beautiful. And it's now 75% of all the new code in Cardano is written in Aiken.
Wow.
And it's a 4-person team, not this big academic team that we have. So if you give people the opportunity to come up, they will come
They
up.
will surprise you.
They will surprise you.
Yeah.
But you got to give them the means to rise. You got to give them the resources to rise, and you got to give them the space to rise. And when you're a big, powerful founder, you have a very long shadow, and you can prevent new ideas from coming. It's the same for Microsoft. Had Gates not been around, there were plenty of people that knew how to compete with Facebook when it was young. There were plenty of people that knew how to build a Windows phone that really had a great idea on how to do it. They were from the Silverlight team. And there were plenty of people that knew how to compete with Google and leverage what Microsoft had to be dominant in search. And those people were not allowed to have the oxygen necessary to be able to survive in that organization because the shadow of the founder was there. And had he stepped back, they probably would have absorbed Google and Facebook and prevented the rise of the iPhone.
I saw that because I brought academic freedom to Eurasia when I was a professor, and I worked for Nazarbayev and President Nazarbayev, and he stepped back from power willingly, which was a very interesting thing, but I think it had something to do with that. Now, Cardano, you got a lot of stories. There's a lot of stories here. I want everybody in Cardano to write a cool Cardano story in the comments here, and maybe we'll get Charles and the core executive team to read them and maybe even comment on them. So everybody has a cool Cardano story. I got one. I'll write it in the description. We're not going to take any more of your time because it's lunch. He just had his keynote and everything like that. If I can have one more question, it's a personal one because I care about social impact. I care about environmental change. I know Cardano has been a leader in that area. But other chains, I don't think and other protocols haven't really picked up the importance of this. Why are you interested in Africa and social impact and these kind of things as a last question?
Well, I don't tend to look at it as the haves and have-nots. I just tend to look at it in terms of human rights as a foundational concern. You say, if you build a system, everybody should be equal under that system. Not pretend equal like we say it on paper, but then in practice we do something else, like real equal, where the founder of the system, the most powerful people in the system have the same use and utility as the poorest people in the system. Otherwise, you've failed. And so cryptocurrencies, blockchain technologies are really the first time ever where we have this type of equality in a social system. We have it in physical systems. Whether you're a rich man or a poor man, gravity affects you the same way, magically. Somehow that's the case. And when you have a physical system that you have immutable laws, you have engineering. And you go from an agrarian society to 63 years later on the surface of the moon. It's possible. I think it's actually 66 years. I think it was 1903 to 1969. It's entirely possible that a farmer in North Carolina could have witnessed the very first plane fly and also, before it died, on television, watched a man land on the moon.
Yeah.
Think about that. It's just that same thread there. The difference was the application of a structured thinking on rules that are consistent for everybody. You're a North Korean engineer, South Korean engineer, you're an Iranian engineer, Israeli engineer, a Russian engineer, a Chinese engineer, American engineer. You're all working with the same set of rules.
Right.
Okay, and regardless of your politics. Social systems don't behave this way. Social systems, they are fluid and they regress, and you have understandings and relationships and contracts and these things. And sometimes we violate them, and often we do because it's convenient for the short term. But in the long term, it destroys the integrity of the system as a whole. Like these tariffs are a great example where, Australia, we have a trade surplus, and we also have a treaty with them, a free trade agreement. And we're arguing that we're doing these tariffs to correct a trade deficit. So under the formula that we just broadcast to everybody, we should actually be subsidizing trade with Australia because we have a surplus, right? And we're actually charging them a 10% tariff. So there's no logical consistency or moral superiority here. We're just arbitrarily and capriciously applying rules. When you do that in a social system, then people get very perturbed and they become very unstable and the relationships fall apart. When you do this in a cryptocurrency or blockchain system, you get one set of rules for everybody.
Right.
And then what ends up happening is you can, just like as engineering, where we make progress very consistently and people always view the future as going to be better because technology will evolve, social progress has that same curve then. You have foundational rights, and year after year after year, you can improve the state of humanity and the state of society because you don't regress. You don't lose human rights. You don't lose free speech. You don't lose free markets. You keep and preserve those things. And as you have an innovation, you have another thing called the smart cow effect, where, if one of the cows figures out how to open the gate, the whole herd gets out. So like a cow opens up the gate and all the cows get out. Well, similarly, if somebody figures out a new governance system, a better way of doing things, a better social system, everybody gets that system for free. So you can come up with this amazing model in Dubai, and then suddenly somebody in Wyoming sees that, and because it's open source, it's on crypto, I can use that, and vice versa. So when you live with that way, you have billions of people literally innovating your governance system, your voting system, your business structure system. That's never been the case before with society. It's always been you're born somewhere and you live with whatever that is.
Position.
The religion there, the constitution there, the voting system there. You got
framework,
the cultural framework, the language, all that stuff. It is what it is. If it's a good thing, congratulations. If it's North Korea, well, you better get used to working hard, not eating.
So integrity and full inclusion.
Exactly.
In a couple of words.
And progress.
Integrity, inclusion, and progress. Thank you so much, Charles. It was a real pleasure to meet you, brother.
Yeah.
Okay, man. Get Cardano. That's not financial advice.
Mountain high.
Rocky Mountain High, yeah.